So, Stephen, yeah, thanks a lot for sparing some time to speak with our entrepreneurs. This is now the fourth of these group Zoom sessions, and we've been getting very good feedback about these sessions, being able to connect the entrepreneurs with some very experienced, knowledgeable people. This is the first session where we're focusing on speaking with someone from a large corporate. And like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's especially relevant for many of the companies because they are operating in the biotech, medtech sphere. And to get us going, I wonder if you could give us a quick kind of 1 minute introduction about your background.
I will try my best. Appreciate the invitation, Nathan and Peter, and good morning and good afternoon wherever you may be. But I think this audience is mostly Korean, so good morning to everybody. Um, I come from. I went through. I made several pit stops along the way before joining J and J. I started out as a researcher, so I have a PhD in biochemistry. But after I got that degree, I knew that academia wasn't really my calling. So I was exploring maybe patent law. So I was a patent examiner for the USPTO. Did that for a bit, then again realized that that was not really my career calling either. So I jumped ship and did a little bit of consulting in the West Coast, a boutique company there that focused mostly on local mid to small biotech company in the Silicon Valley area, and also work with NGOs like Gates Foundation, doing mostly strategy consulting and management reshuffling, things of that nature. And eventually, I connected with local VCs in the Bay Area. One VC in particular wanted to maybe explore the possibility of setting up a biotech-focused fund in Asia. This was a fund coming out of Singapore, and then an office in the Bay Area. And I thought that was an interesting opportunity. So the general partner and I went back and forth to see if there's anything out here in Asia to get us started. And this was, maybe about 15 years ago, mind you. Uh, I think the initiative was there. All the government wanted to set up a fund, but I think the critical mass in terms of the biotech opportunities was not quite there yet. But to make the long story short, that was a very interesting opportunity, connecting with the relevant stakeholders here and understanding the ecosystem. And that's what sort of got me into coming back to Asia. And since then, I've been based in Hong Kong. I've been here for about, 13, 14 plus years now. I've been involved with startup scenes here, as Nathan mentioned. I was leading one startup for a biotech startup that was looking to develop a type 2 diabetes small molecule drug. From there, I moved on to more on the advisory side, doing licensing and M&A work for a small boutique shop, and that was also quite interesting. And after that, I decided to get into startup scene again and try to set up a small diagnostic company looking for hyperfibrillation type of a point of care device. Very interesting. We're pretty close to getting it funded, but for a variety of reasons, it didn't work. And that's when J and J knocked on my door, and I decided to join. So that's sort of my journey. I moved around quite a bit, starting with academia, going to patent law, consulting, advisory, and now big corp.
Okay, great. Good introduction. Helps set the context for this discussion as well. So at Johnson & Johnson, your title is Director of New Ventures and Transactions. Just so the companies, I think that your answer to the next question could lead quite nicely into our Q&A. What is your role at J&J? It sounds like it's looking for new opportunities, and it sounds like you do engage a lot with startups. Is that correct?
That's correct, Nathan. I think I would say that my main role is really to engage with the external startups uh, for North Asia because that's the territory that I cover. And
Yeah.
North Asia for me includes Korea, of course, then Taiwan and Hong Kong. But we have other colleagues within the Innovation Center in Shanghai that covers other regions within Asia Pacific. But it might be better if I can give you a brief background on how we're structured. Uh,
Okay.
Obviously, J&J itself is a big organization. We're the largest pharmaceutical company out there, partly because we're very diversified. It's not just pharmaceuticals that J&J is involved with. We have the Janssen business arm that does the pharmaceuticals, but as most of you are aware, we also do consumer healthcare. You can go to any you know pharma shop and you'll see J&J brand from baby wipes to whatnot, right? So consumer healthcare is another business sector that J&J is involved in. But in addition to that, we cover medical device. So typical brands that some of you may be familiar with are the Ethicon business that does a lot of global surgery tools and things of that nature in the operating rooms. And we also have the Pew Thintus, which is the one of the largest orthopedics company out there. Um, it's a big organization. We have more than 200 plus operating companies under the J&J brand, right? So it's a big organization covering three different sectors: consumer healthcare, medical device, and pharmaceutical. Having said that, uh, we uh, we set up this J&J innovation, and it was driven by our current chief scientific officer, Dr. Paul Stoffels. And the premises behind this is that we understand that innovation happens everywhere, and we wanted to try to capture that. So how do we do that? We don't want to create a central location where people come to us, but we wanted to make sure that we were there in the hot spots of biotech innovation, and that's why we set up many what we call it innovation centers around the world. So we have this thing called J&J Innovation, which is out there to look for external innovation. And under this innovation umbrella, we have several business units. One of them is the innovation centers, and that's the business unit that I work for. And we have four across the world, strategically positioned in hotspots. So, for example, we have an innovation center in Boston, one in San Francisco, and one in London, and we also have one in Shanghai, which is the one that I work for. And the Shanghai office is a little bit different because we have innovation offices in addition to the innovation center. And the innovations office, IC office that I sit in is the one based in Hong Kong. But we have one in Tokyo, one in Singapore. So all of these are able to give us coverage on the ground of external innovation. Um, so we have that, and we also have JJVC, which is our corporate VC fund. Then we also have J Labs. I think some of you have heard of that. That's our incubator. And so we've created a little ecosystem within the innovation umbrella so that external partners like the audience listening to this can plug into the relevant tools, we'd like to call it, to help accelerate the development of their innovation. Now, this is a bit of a long-winded, answer to your question, Nathan, but I think it's important to set up how we're structured because some people are not really sure who they should reach out to which organization within J&J they should reach out to. So I think that's important. My role as a new venture um, uh, lead covering North Asia, as I said a little bit earlier, is to look for external innovation, engage with them to see if there's alignment with what we're looking for internally. We get feedback from our R&D stakeholders, from pharma, from medical device, from consumer healthcare, that tell us what they're interested in. We'll go out there and look for it. Once we find that, we will socialize that to the relevant stakeholders internally, right? We play that matchmaking role, and that's very important in a large organization because an outsider may not know who to reach out to. So
Hmm.
we make that happen. Once that happens, uh, innovation centers have a variety of functional roles from legal to finance to other expertise, and we can facilitate the deal negotiation and transaction, right? I used to actually, when I started my role at J&J, I played a hybrid role doing both new ventures and transactions, meaning that I would look for external innovation. And when I find one, I would also sit down and try to make that transaction happen. But now I'm focusing more on the new venture side, deal sourcing side, but covering a more wide variety of territories: Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea. So I hope that sort of gives you some answer and what I do.
Yeah, yeah. It's good background, and I think it's obviously fair to say that every large corporation is going to be structured in a slightly different way. So, the structure, the format that you've described for J and J may not apply directly to many other major corporates. However, I think it's also fair to say that most major corporates do have innovation teams, and there is a lot of scouting activity. So, for entrepreneurs out there, looking for people like Stephen in other organizations is a way in, perhaps a better way in than going after the individual business units that seem the most relevant. Do you think that's a fair comment?
I think you bring up a very good point. Not all big pharmas are created equal, right? You should apply different approaches to different pharma. I used to work for a company called Toria Emerging Markets, which eventually became Kybora Emerging Markets. We are, an advisory company doing licensing and M&A advisory for the biotech industry. And we used to take on projects from small to mid-cap companies who had an interesting asset and they want to license that out to big pharma. So our approach was, if we knew someone within the big pharma that we're trying to approach, we'll leverage that connection and try to socialize that opportunity to hire up, right? But in general, you want to knock on as many doors as possible because one door may not open, but another door may. So that's sort of the approach that we take. And I think that's the approach that most startups take. They try to knock on as many doors as possible of a particular organization. Uh, that's fair, but I think one drawback to that is that the message may uh, become not so focused. And within that organization, whom you have reached out to many, 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 uh, at some point, you know, the importance of your technology may get diluted. People within the organization may be saying, if this was so important, why hasn't John Doe here and this, other business department uh, given this more visibility? And why has it not gotten enough traction, right? So that's sort of the drawback. In fact, at J&J, we get something similar, right? We have externals who are knocking on many doors within J&J. And we hear this, of course, internally because we communicate with each other. Uh, and I've seen situations where you know uh, the message gets diluted, and um, sometimes the effect may not be as positive as one would think. So I think that's part of the reason why J&J Innovation was set up, why we're here, why I'm here, to coordinate that message within the corporation so that it's not diluted. It's the the importance of the technology is uh, relayed within the organization in a coordinated manner. I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now there's a lot of questions here. We won't have time to go through everything, um, but I guess you've got the list of questions open in front of you, perhaps. But anyway, it's coordinated or organized in sections. So the first section here is really a section on cold outreach. So kind of how best to make this outreach to a major corporation. And I think some of these questions we can probably get through pretty quickly. So how roughly how many startups approach you um, in a given week or month, would you say?
Too many to count. There's your
Are
short
we
answer.
okay? Okay, okay. So, and I think this would be true of anyone in any major corporation in your role. So the first thing is obviously that you get contacted by far more companies than you can deal with. So when you receive, let's say, an email from a startup, what are you looking for to make a quick decision on whether or not to do anything with this?
Uh, you know, we have a focus area, right? And it's like when you're trying to raise money as a startup. Uh, you try to raise money from VCs in particular, right? And there are many VCs out there with different mandates and a different investment focus. So you have startups that apply a blanketed approach, basically send as many, requests from many VCs that they're aware of as possible. I think that's probably not the best or the most efficient way of doing this because, like I said, every VC has a different mandate, different investment focus, right? So I think you need, as a startup, to do some homework, right? You need to see what the VC's interests are. Are they playing in the medical device space? Are they focused on, biotech space? Because it's different. If you're developing a medtech, you don't want to pitch to a VC that only focuses on biotech, right? So you need to tailor make your pitch according to uh, your audience or big pharma company in this case. I mean, most big pharma will cover the typical disease areas like oncology, cardiovascular, immunology, etc. And I don't think Johnson and Johnson is an exception. But uh, you want to do your homework ahead of the time. And even on J&J website, we have a lot of information there for the public to look at. Innovate, we have J&J Innovation website where we tell you what the different business units are looking for. So for pharmaceuticals, I can tell you that they're interested in oncology, immunology, infectious disease and vaccines. Then we have neuroscience, etc. We have like 6 disease areas that we're looking for. Underneath each of these categories, we have more granularity, of course, but that's more strategic, so we don't disclose that. But you'll get that kind of information from other big pharma website too. So do your homework first. Go there and see what they're interested in and knock on the relevant doors. That's one. Uh, when someone sends me an email, obviously I'm going to look whether what they're working on is relevant to what we're searching for, right? That's one. Then, I'm going to be looking at development stage. J&J Innovation was set up specifically to look for early stage external innovation. So I cover 3 sectors: pharma, medical device, and consumer healthcare. All of our colleagues at Asia Pacific Innovation Center covered the 3 sectors. But for pharmaceutical, for example, early stage for us means up to phase 2A. So before human proof of concept, right? So if you're working on that, then we'll look at it. Our, the sweet spot will be maybe about a year away from an IND packaging if you're developing something within the pharmaceuticals. But if you have something really innovative, let's say you're working on the next CAR T technology, obviously we don't want to miss out on that. So that would be the next. What are you working on? What stage of development are you in? Then you want to tell us about maybe for the first engagement, the email, we probably I don't really need to know what the patent situation is, but obviously at some point we're gonna know what that is. We're gonna want to know what the target is, and etc. At a very high level, tell me what the target is, which indication, what development stage, and what are you looking for? Are you looking for money or are you looking for partnership? Innovation centers are not are we have a separate arm for equity investment. I mentioned earlier that we have a business unit called JJDC. That's our corporate VC arm, and I can make that connection as well. We're operating as a one J&J, so think of us as multiple tools, but think of me as the conduit to reaching out to JJDC, J Labs, and etc.
Mhm. Yeah. And just a couple of practical tips. So I run a marketing company, so we're very content driven. We always stress the critical importance of an email subject line. So, I think companies, if they're reaching out to you, they should put it in the email subject line what they're doing, what they're looking for, and that helps to grab attention. Um, Within the cold email, should companies give you just a quick overview in a few lines? Should they include a two-page fact sheet? Should they send you over their 50-slide investor pitch deck as a first step? What's the best for you?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Nathan, it's it's nice if you can grab my attention immediately with a catchy or something in the subject line that's going to really catch my attention. But at the end of the day, we're highly data driven company. Science is going to speak louder than anything else, and that's what we're going to look at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how great a pitch you make. If the science is not there, we're not going to engage, right?
Mhm.
And it's certain science. As I mentioned earlier, there are areas that we're interested in, particular target, particular disease area. So if you're not hitting those, then probably not. But at the same time, we also know that there could be transformative technologies being developed by the external partners that we as an organization may not have really looked at, right? Again, going back to the CAR T technology, no one would have really put too much, thought on taking a cell out of a patient, re-engineering it, and putting it back in. That seems very cumbersome. Yet that's what's really taking off right now. So we don't want to miss out on that, right? We want to make sure. I want to make sure that I don't miss out on that. So I make every effort to read all the emails that come to me, but obviously, some will take get my attention more than others. If you have on the subject line that, hey, this is for a specific disease area and for this particular target, and I know that this is something that we're looking for, obviously, I'm going to open that up immediately and look into it.
Right.
And for the first engagement, yeah, I would appreciate it if you had a quick summary, then
Yeah.
say a 50 pager PowerPoint presentation. We'll get to that eventually, but
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
probably in the first engagement.
Okay. No, it's a good point. And
One more thing,
mm,
Nathan, it's very
sure.
important. Some of the externals like to send us slide deck labeled confidential. Now, I understand this. I've been a startup entrepreneur myself. You want to protect your data, but unless there's a CDA in place, don't send us something that's confidential. Typically, they're not confidential. Startup entrepreneurs just like to put that labeling, uh, but you need to remove that. In fact, I will tell you that you need to remove it before I can review it, and I will delete it from my file until you send me a non-confidential deck.
Okay. Very good point. Um, and Yeah, so I think that's good advice. So keep initial outreach very targeted, very honest, data driven, and simple. And if there's interest from you based on the initial information, then obviously you can go to the next stage. And I the reason I bring it up is I often see startups literally sending 50-page slide decks as a first approach. Now, if you're doing that, you're giving the person on the other end of the email quite a big job. And often these slide decks are not organized in the most efficient, effective way. So, you want to make it as easy as possible for a person like Stephen to say, oh, okay, these are the things I'm looking for. Okay, you tick two or three of these boxes. Let's have a chat or let's see some more information.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So let's say that yeah, a company has sent through an initial email with a two-pager, gives the basics. You're interested. You want to set up a call. Now, I'm sure that you would provide some advice on what the company should prepare for the call, but what kinds of things would you be looking for from a first call, and how long are those calls likely to be?
Yeah, so it depends. Sometimes it could be exploratory. So I would just get on the call with the external and I'll try to find out, learn more about the technology and see if this is something that I want to bring it up to the R&D team, to the relevant R&D team internally. Sometimes, I see that this is something very relevant and it's a high priority target, for example, then I'll reach out to the relevant R&D stakeholders and invite them to join the call, right? And, you know, I want to try to present you, the external partner, in the best way possible. So if it's an important call with senior R&D stakeholders getting involved, I'll try to coach you before the meeting. I'll walk you through, see if the presentation requires a bit more tweaking. So I'll play that role with you. I think it's important, yeah,
Mhm.
because I want to try to get that particular deal reviewed uh, uh, in a detailed manner. Get that opportunity, have the chance that it really deserve, and not just be glanced over, right? So I'll
Yeah.
help you with that. So it really depends. If it's exploratory, I might just get on the call and have a quick review and see if this is something that I want to continue to socialize internally. If it's a target that I know there's a high interest, and I'll bring in the relevant stakeholders, and maybe I'll get in a quick call with you and try to coach you.
Hmm. Okay. And maybe just a quick word of advice from my side. If you are invited, if companies are invited to a call like this, oh, sorry, Andrew. Oh no, it's not Andrew. There's a terrible echo. Oh, it stopped. If everyone else on the call could make sure that their mics are muted. Uh, Thankfully, that just lasted for a couple of seconds. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yes. So if you are invited to a call like this, I think that entrepreneurs are perfectly within their right to ask you what they should prepare for the call, or even to ask if there's any supplemental material they should send through in advance, or perhaps even a sample of some of the questions you might be asking, so that they are best prepared. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Ask by all means. It doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Right.
Uh, Sometimes, there's a bit of a language barrier, right?
Mhm.
English is not typically uh, the most fluent language of their choice, right? So we absolutely understand that, right? So to mitigate that kind of situation, sometimes we'll send the list of questions ahead of time,
Mhm.
right? So that you can respond in writing back. Then during the call, we'll try to sort of go over that in more detail, right? So that could be another way to address some of that. But those are usually after several rounds of preliminary calls when we send you a list of questions, because that's when we're like really interested and want to learn more about the technology.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it goes without saying, really, that if companies have an opportunity to speak to someone like you, they should really have someone senior on the call. Is that also a good tip? What do you think about that?
That's my preference. We are a 130-year-old company uh, with 250, operating companies, and we have more than 130,000 people employed worldwide. So you may be the CEO of a listed company in Korea, but show us some respect as well. So don't just send out your junior BD person who doesn't really understand the science. It's a waste of your time, a great opportunity to connect with J&J, and you may have just wasted that opportunity by sending in someone who doesn't really know the science, because that's what we're going to be focused on. We do want the BD person involved, obviously, because we want to discuss with you about how you want to partner with us. But we want to focus on the science. So make sure that the relevant R&D person is on that call. I think I've seen that happen actually a few times. It's a terrible waste of opportunity.
Okay. Very, very important call. And I'd encourage, if your CEO or if your CTO, chief scientist, whoever it is, isn't fluent in English, I would say still include them on the call as a demonstration of respect. And I think that often uh, Korean entrepreneurs that I come across, they tell you they don't speak English, and then when you speak to them, they do. And so, someone like Stephen is not trying to get you on a call to catch you out. It's because they really want to hear from you and understand your technology. So, even if you're not terribly confident with your English, I would say get on the call, because, like Stephen said, you don't want to waste an opportunity because you're not confident enough about your English.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Um, so you've kind of answered a couple of the next questions already. It's about next steps. Now, engaging with a company like Johnson and Johnson is not going to happen in a single call. So now there won't be any rules for this, but can you give us any indication of just very roughly what the process could look like, how many months it could take before, from initial contact to some form of, commitment? Are there any typical rules for this? How many phone calls it would take until the company speaks to the internal business unit?
Yeah, unfortunately, Nathan, there's no one size fit kind of situation. I've been involved in deals, a simple research collaboration, which was closed in 3 months, to more complex research collaboration plus licensing deals. That's taken us, uh, from from the inception to finding that opportunity to actually getting around to executing it. It's taken us more than a year, right? So it
Yeah,
can take long time. It really depends on the complexity.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
But a typical process, that we would have to go through, and I can't share with you everything. Obviously, we have an
sure.
internal process that we keep it to ourselves. But uh, you know, first I would identify the opportunity, right? And I'll say that this could be interesting. Then I will socialize that to the relevant R&D stakeholders at Innovation Center, at Asia Pacific Innovation Center. Within the office, we have what we call it therapeutic area leaders. So these are individuals that directly interface with the R&D teams for oncology, uh, for neuroscience, uh, IDV, infectious disease and vaccines, as well as immunology. Then we have another TA leader that does consumer healthcare. Uh, so we can, and another TA that does that works with an organization called DPDS. These This business unit looks at CMC, manufacturing, platform technology, et cetera, and they're the go-to guys for assessing opportunities in that realm. So I can quickly reach out to them and say, hey, is this something that your business unit might be interested in? And if there's interest, then we'll set up a preliminary call with you, right? And if that's interesting, then we'll probably bring in some more senior level R&D stakeholders, and 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 prior to that, obviously, I think we'll probably execute a CDA with you,
Mhm.
and sometimes that can drag too, depending on on our side, we can get it done really quickly. We have a CDA template and we send that out, and that's what we typically like to execute rather than the other side's CDA template. Uh, and if the other side are okay with the terms, we can get that, you know, uh, done really quickly. But if the other side decides to drag their feet, that too can take, a few weeks. But once we have the CDA in place, we'll bring in probably more senior R&D experts and have a more open discussion about your technology. And if there's more interest. Uh, at the innovation center level, I will try to put together what we call it a deal team, right? And that deal team will include a transaction person, a finance person, a legal person at minimum, to help discuss what is the next step, what sort of deal structure makes sense for that particular opportunity. And there's all sorts of other things that goes behind the scene to get that deal team in place. So you have to be patient with us. It takes some time to, get to these steps. So, let's say now we have a deal team in place, right? Then we're going to be discussing about, what kind of deal structure. Are we looking at a straightforward licensing? Or are we looking at a research collaboration with soft rights? Or is it a licensing? I mean, is it a research collaboration with an option to license at the end? Or is it an MTA where we take in your sample and test it out ourselves to see how valid your claims are, etc. So there's many ways we can uh, potentially collaborate and push this to the next level, right? So if it's a research collaboration, then we're going to sit down with you and discuss, what is the research plan and who's doing what is the budget, what is the timeline, what are the deliverables, etc. That needs to be done with the externals input, right? And once that gets done, we have to go through a series of internal approval process to share with you the term sheet, a non-binding term sheet, and that takes some time too. And once you have a term sheet and you agree, then again we bring it inside and draft an agreement, and that requires a series of internal approval before we can share with you, and that's how it's done. So
Mhm.
I'm not covering everything, but at a high level, that's sort of the process that we would probably go through.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, three months to a year, based on my experience working with startups that are doing this, is relatively quick, to be honest. 3 months seems pretty quick. So,
Now, that's
um,
just my own personal experience, Nathan. I
right.
mean,
Okay.
some have gone even so. Some of you may be aware of the Yuan deal that our Janssen, business completed a few years back.
Uh,
I think that took, several years from, you know, knowing about the opportunity and eventually executing it. I think
mm,
that may have taken some time, but that's a very, late stage, high stake opportunity, right? So we had a lot of folks from R&D that did the scientific due diligence. I mean, if it's an interesting opportunity, we'll do our best to, move it quickly, but it will take some time and patience.
yeah. And thanks for giving some of the details of the actual steps involved as well. I think that obviously from startup side there's always frustration that big companies move slow, but uh, there's steps that you simply have to take, and you can't rush these. You can't do it
Yeah,
overnight.
yeah.
And things taking, I guess another positive is that things taking slow doesn't mean that there's no interest. It just, you're just needing to follow the steps in the process.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And, I think you do need that patience working with a big corporation.
Right.
And you know, people will ask, "What are you working on now? What stage is this in?" Sometimes I can share, sometimes I cannot because it's just internal thing that we don't typically share with our externals. But you know, if it's an opportunity that's gone through the CDA stage and we're looking at the R&D and we're thinking about drafting a research plan, that definitely there's an interest and it is being reviewed and it is moving forward. So
Mhm.
be patient.
Sure. Um, yeah. So one thing that I've just noticed here. So what one of the questions was, what are you likely to be assessing on the call? Now, I'd like to maybe see if there are any differences between J and perhaps other large corporates versus VCs. If you speak to VCs, they always say team, 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 which makes sense, and that VCs invest in founders, and you hear this kind of thing a lot. You've stressed the science a lot, and I wonder if that is very conscious, or if there are, other kind of factors, like, for example, the team, that are also, critically important. And perhaps if there are differences with how VCs assess startups, what are those differences and why are they different?
No, I don't think we're that different either from what the VCs are looking for. The the great importance that they place in the people is also very important for us because at the end of the day, it's the people that's going to execute, right? Whether it's the science or the business. So we do look at the profile of the executives and the team a lot too. Um, are they do they have the relevant scientific background or commercial background to really take this to the next level, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, we know that these are startups, so there's going to be gaps there, and this is where we can probably be a better partner than say a VC might be, because what we're providing is not just the finance, but also the know-hows, right? In fact, some of the opportunities that we engage most of the opportunities that we like to engage in are opportunities where we have great amount of knowledge, right? So that the value that we bring to the table is not just the money, but it's the know-how, right? We want to be able to really accelerate the development of that technology. And how do we do that? Well, we need to know the domain knowledge, right? So we try to do that. Um, so yes, there is an importance in the people running the company. Is there are are these is the science credible? Is the data reproducible? Um, and is the technology transformational? Those are all really linked to the science and the scientist in the company, right?
Yeah. Okay. Now we have a question here from one of the companies, which is on this vein as well. The question is, I was wondering if there's any criteria when selecting startups to collaborate. Now, obviously, you've gone into this in some detail, I think, in terms of the stage of development, the importance of the science, the relevance and accuracy of the data, and the quality of the team. um, anything else you would add to that, or do you think that pretty much covers everything?
So at J&J, all the employees live by the Credo, and that's what you see in the background. The virtual background behind me is the Credo. And the first line of the Credo says that, we work for the patients, the doctors, they're the most important elements within the work that we do, right? And we also want to be fair in the deals that we try to execute. So when I look at an opportunity, I want to see whether this is transformative because, incremental uh, development, or I should say, incrementally better technologies are important on its own. But what J&J Innovation is focused on are the transformational technologies. So we're looking for first in class, best in class opportunities in the pharmaceutical, medical device, and consumer healthcare. So that's the first thing that I look at. Second thing is I look at if the science is credible. Is the scientist that's working on this, you know, are they, uh, are they doing the right experiments? Is the data reproducible, etc.? That's the second thing. Then uh, the other thing that I would look at is, uh, you know, when we finally sit down with you on the table, are the terms of the deal fair, right? And that's going back to the credo of the company. We try to make sure. We do our best to make sure the deal that we're proposing to you is fair to us and fair to you. That's very important for us too. Um, so, those are the things that I can sort of think of. But then, of course, there are the nitty gritties of, is the IP strong? Um, um, is the team able to develop this outside of J&J uh, as long as possible? Because that's sort of the business model for us is to help you, the entrepreneurs, develop this technology as long as possible outside of the J&J, because that sort of reduces the burden of leveraging our resources internally, right? So we try to keep the development outside as long as possible, and that's going to require people to really execute on that. So can they do that to a point where we're comfortable? We like to use the term onboarding. Basically means you develop it to a certain stage outside, and if you meet certain milestones, then we're ready to license it from you, onboard it from you. Yeah. But try to develop this outside as long as possible. And are the people able to do that? So those are some of the other things that I would sort of look at.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Um, huh. So the we're now on to the other questions. So the last few. Now one ongoing discussion, obviously, I would say on both sides of the table, both from corporates and from startups, is this topic of cultural fit. Now, obviously, in many cases, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they don't fit in a corporate. It's not always the case, of course, but it's this issue of cultural fit obviously comes up a lot. So, what is your advice, or what is your feeling about cultural fit? And I guess you're particularly well placed to answer this question because you have experienced both yourself. Um, there must have been something about the freedom of being an entrepreneur that attracted you. You're now working in a big corporate. So, how should startups tackle this corporate fit issue?
I think the biggest thing is that things move slowly in a big organization, right? Things
Hmm.
move very quickly in a startup, and you need to be, right? But
Hmm.
it's that speed and agility that we're trying to embrace and foster, right? Because we cannot do that internally. And that's why, as I said earlier, we want to try to develop your technology externally as long as possible. If there's way we as the big corporation can support that and help accelerate that, and that's the value that we can bring to you, right? There's a J&J way of doing things, not just at the business level, but also at the science level, right? So, when you're preparing your R&D document, for example, there are certain things that you need to do. Otherwise, you're not going to cut the mustard, so to speak, when you file with the FDA, for example. And we know how to do that. We know how to do it very well, right? We've been doing it for the past 130 years. So when we tell you to do it this way, then I think it's in your interest to do it that way once we're in a partnership. And these are the things that I think typically the entrepreneurs will listen and do that because they don't know. And that's why they want to partner with J&J to get guidance, right? So they'll do that. So, but things do move slow. Uh, y- you know, we want to partner with people that listen to us. Uh, I mentioned three things that I look at, but the other important thing is, you know, is this company or the opportunity at a critical juncture where when J&J gets involved, it's going to really speed up the development of their development of their uh, technology. That's the other fourth element that I forgot to mention, but that's also very important for us. Do we have the know-how at J&J, and t- do does the external partner know that this is their next critical milestone, and by us getting involved, is it going to really push their technology quick? That's the other thing that we look at.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I guess one of the critical points on cultural fit, you would be assessing, I'm guessing from a very early stage, is it going to be possible for J&J to work with this person? Are they are they too independent? Are they likely to follow the uh, the are they likely to follow the processes needed to bring this to success? I guess that is something that you would be assessing from a very early stage.
Yeah, I didn't directly address your question regarding the cultural fit there, Nathan, but we do have a slide that I like we used, and it shows two sides of the equation, what the industry needs and what the startup needs, right? Industry needs innovation, we need cost saving, and we need agility, right? And the entrepreneurs need the money, the infrastructure, and the domain expertise. So, together, uh, we create a more complete picture there. So, yes, I mean, the startups are quick, and we want to leverage that. We don't want to be the barrier to that, but we certainly don't want you to cut corners, right? I mean, this is a highly regulated industry, so you need to do certain things in a certain way. If it takes time, then that's what you need to do. So we will sort of give you guidance on that. But at the very sort of personal level, this is a people business. Obviously, we want to work with people that we like. So I give you a good example. When I was running Catches in Pharma, it's one of the startups that I was leading as the CEO. We were developing a small molecule for type 2 diabetes. And I pitched to many VCs and to big pharmas. One of those big pharma was J and J. And the guy that I pitched to, a guy named Ming De, uh, uh, I pitched to this guy, and he worked for the J and J Innovation. I actually didn't know what J and J Innovation was back then, but I do remember the person that I pitched to. So, fast forward 5, 7 years later, I get this call from J and J. Are you interested in the position? I eventually learned that the guy that really pushed for me was Ming De at J and J Innovation. So it's a small community. Everybody knows sort of each other, right? Especially in Asia Pacific. Be nice to each other. Be respectful to each other. We want to make sure that when we partner with you, you're a team that we can really work together with.
Yeah, good. Good point. Very good point. Things often come around like that,
Yep.
or in any other way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the next question: are there any kind of pet peeves that you have in dealing with startups, or any kind of silly, easily avoidable mistakes that startups make in their approach to you, or I don't know, the way that they present themselves, or anything like this? And thinking really about things that the entrepreneurs could think about and kind of fix quickly.
I think the biggest one was what I had mentioned earlier and what you had sort of alluded to. It's a great opportunity. Don't mess it up. Make sure the relevant people are on that call, right? I think the first impression is very important for a lot of things, and certainly it's the case here. You want to show your best foot forward.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And from the startup side, I can kind of understand why they might mess this up, because startup founders are busy people, obviously. And so they might think, oh, it's just a first call. All we need to do is open the door. But the problem is, if you don't open the door in the first call, that opportunity could go. And I think sometimes that mistake is made when companies are looking at too many different opportunities at the same time, trying to do too many different things. Maybe they're a part of too many government support programs and they're not able to focus on anything properly. And I think that when you're trying to do too many things is often when you make silly mistakes like that. Whereas if the CEO is really focused on this kind of opportunity, they wouldn't let an opportunity like that slide.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And anything specific to Korean startups, either things that Korean startups do very well, or things that kind of, generally speaking, Korean startups could or should do better at?
Nothing comes to mind immediately
Okay.
because again, it's about the science, right? If you have good science, it doesn't matter whether you're a Korean startup or a Chinese startup or wherever you're coming from. But obviously, again, the language is a barrier, and you are dealing with a U.S. company. At some point, you're going to be able to present your case in English. It's better that way. I mean, we work with Japanese pharmas, and we have two colleagues who are new ventures based in Tokyo who speak very fluent Japanese, and they've been a very valuable translator in addition to their role as a new venture. So we can help you, and I speak some Korean, but not enough to translate something. Uh, so uh, that can be an issue, but at the same time, not so much an issue because we have translators.
Mhm.
Uh, but when I listen to the quality of the pitch, say a U.S. company versus a regional company, there are some differences just because the English is not their main language, right? Uh, but again, if it's solid science, that will come through, and that's what we're really interested in.
Okay, great. Um, so a question on COVID. Um, so we, I think in all of our calls like this, we've had we've learned similar things, that uh, at at a certain stage, deals are typically done in person. It's very difficult to push a deal through, whether it's an investment or an R&D partnership. It's difficult to do that via Zoom. Are there any things, and COVID is not going to disappear tomorrow. It looks like we've got it for another 6 months or more, perhaps, where it'll affect things. So are there any pieces of advice that you can give companies to kind of get through this point and still move their businesses forward?
Okay, I have to make this the last question, Nathan, because I have
Okay.
another call actually.
Oh,
Uh,
right. No problem.
um, so for COVID, I think hopefully it goes away and we're back to normal. Although people talk about the new normal these days, but um, we want to make sure that your research can continue, right? And that has been the biggest impact, at least on the research side for big pharmas and startups, right? Many are uh, leveraging CROs, and if CROs are shut down because of the COVID, then your research cannot move forward. So we want to understand what sort of mitigation programs that you have in place. Are you leveraging maybe a CRO in China because those are open right now to continue your research moving forward? So those are the things that you probably want to think about and be able to address when we talk to you. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Um, Great. Yeah. So, well, we will let you go get off. I haven't seen any other questions from the entrepreneurs. If companies do have any specific questions, I think it's best to forward those to Peter, and if we can either try to answer them ourselves or get back to Stephen to get answers. But Stephen, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Um, I'm sure it's been valuable for the entrepreneurs and hopefully at least interesting and fun for you as well.
Yeah. It was good fun. Thanks for inviting me. Take
Great.
care.